All right. Let's get started. This is the 11:10. We're running a little bit behind schedule. The unsupervised investing panel. So joining us on stage is an amazing panel, and leading the discussion is Sarah Guo. Sarah is a principal at Greylock, and she's been investing actively in the ML space. So over to Sarah and the rest of the panel.
Is this on? Okay, great. Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Guo. I'm an investor at Greylock Partners. Super excited to be talking to the panelists here. And I also do early stage investing in AI, but I've got no content today. So I'm just going to introduce our esteemed panelists really quickly since we have a short panel. Starting with Elad, he is an entrepreneur, the founder of Color Genomics and Mixer Labs, an operator from Google and Twitter, and an investor with a highly successful track record, including an Airbnb, Stripe, Square, Pinterest, Instacart, Gusto, Zenefits, and a bunch of ML companies I'm missing. And he's also an MIT guy. We've got Leonard, who founded Neuron VC to invest solely in AI-first companies. He has founded 6 companies, including Clover, which you could see on the counters of over 300,000 brick-and-mortar businesses, and he is also an MIT grad. Aileen is the founder of Cowboy Ventures, going out of order, sorry, which focuses on backing seed-stage technology companies from AI-driven SaaS, enterprise security and infrastructure, to new digitally native consumer brands, so the whole spectrum. Prior to Cowboy, she spent over a decade as an early-stage investor at Kleiner Perkins. We've got Ajay, who's an enterprise software partner at Lightspeed. Previously, he spent 6 years at Palantir, working on both defense and commercial businesses. And he's particularly drawn to uses of AI and data to reimagine data-poor and industry-specific processes. And finally, we have Vanessa, who's a new partner at NEA. Prior to Ventures, she spent nearly 10 years in various product management positions, most recently leading user-facing app product management at Box. And she also comes from Twilio, Playdom, Microsoft Xbox, and Surface. So a ton of expertise on the panel today. I think we'll start with just a little bit of initial perspective, and maybe with 1 or 2 questions we'll go down the line. But maybe tell the audience a little bit about your strategy or not for investing in AI and what kinds of AI companies you're excited about.
Sure. So I think that there's ultimately 3 areas in machine learning or AI that are really interesting right now. And some of them I think are a bit overlooked. So I think the first one is actually the semiconductor layer. So obviously everybody's using NVIDIA GPUs. Those GPUs really aren't optimized for machine learning applications. Really what you want is fast I/O and then really the ability to do very fast matrix multiplication. And so a lot of people now are starting to build custom ASICs for that. So I think that's one big area. Number 2 is, I think, any sort of verticalized applications of AI, and then sort of, so how to use machine learning to sort of advance something. So, for example, Stitch Fix has a large machine learning team. And then lastly, my non-area is AGI. So, really trying to build a general purpose intelligence today, I think, is a little bit premature, but also, I think it's not really venture fundable, although obviously people are funding it in order to sell a team basically to Google or because they think it's interesting.
Great. So I similarly enjoy at least the first 2 areas you were talking about, which was vertical focused applications of deep learning. And then, as you mentioned, there's definitely some technology out there that's harder tech that doesn't really exist to do some of the deep learning, particularly on the edge, if you want to push deep learning all the way out to the edge and not just have it in these server clouds. David Weekley and I started Neuron VC to be completely focused on the deep learning side is essentially like the equivalent of what are we going to see. The example I give is your Yellow Pages and you create a website versus your Google and you're only on the web. Where can we find companies who are really starting out from the deep learning side and saying what are the applications that would never have been possible without deep learning, and then let's go tackle that. And a lot of them are likely going to be in that vertical space where you don't see even maybe any computers today because things like, let's say, computer vision were too hard to handle with traditional computer programming skill sets.
Sure. I've been more focused on the vertical application of ML. What we find commonly is when we can apply these to problems that have been around for a really long time. You can unlock entirely new user experiences and automate and improve the efficiency of teams and also of your customers. So I think the most important thing when people come in to talk to us about their applications or what they're building towards is that they have customer validation and that they're very clear on the problem that they're solving.
Great. Yeah, so when I look at AI, I mean, for me, I don't think a lot of things have changed. I mean, I think AI, it's kind of table stakes. I really like to focus in on kind of what are the customer problems that the entrepreneur is trying to solve. I think today, it's a combination, like all of the companies, it's kind of a combination of storage, cloud compute, and data, and leveraging data in ways that you haven't been able to do before. And if you're not doing that today, you're kind of dead. And so really looking for organizations that are leveraging that in good ways, and also very vertically focused around, there's so much low-hanging fruit around transformation of existing industries. There is a lot of deep tech, great stuff that we saw like around deep reinforcement learning and things like that. But I think there's just so much low-hanging fruit that I'm really excited about, and how do you apply these things to existing industries?
Like my esteemed panelists, we're pretty focused on vertical-oriented and application-specific ML. And NLP. It's interesting, we're seed stage focused, which is really interesting for this category, and it's a little bit like, I feel like this is a frontier where new rules and new investing assumptions are potentially being made, because unlike the past decade that we've had of seed stage investing where a person could build an app, put it into App Store, get some users, there's like a pretty straightforward application. You didn't need a data set. You didn't really need a lot of technology, to be honest, and so you could kind of evaluate the application at face value. But for these new applications that are going to be ML driven, like there may not be a very big data set when you start out. There may not be a lot of technology when you start out. And so you're really meeting people who you're trying to evaluate if they have the opportunity to grow and they have the vision for what the application is going to become. And they've shown you something they figured out with like a couple people and a smaller data set. So it's a really interesting kind of new frontier in terms of thinking about how to invest at seed stages. And that's why I think we're all looking at and meeting with a lot of companies, but to be honest, like the combination of the people with the idea, with the proof versus what is happening at very large companies right now, like Microsoft and Google and other places, or Uber, it's a really exciting time, and I think that's where, like these challenging times in a way where it's not super obvious, or where I think when opportunities really happen.
Yeah, I would say that a question that comes up frequently for us is where you're going to get the data from. And a competitive advantage is actually the data, access to data sets. And that's an area we actually dig into pretty extensively.
So I promise this will be the only question I weigh in on, but I think it'd be useful for the audience to hear about some of the companies that we've actually invested in and putting your money where your mouth is. So I'll talk about two really briefly. We're investors in a company called Rumbix, which is a data platform for the construction industry. And the basic thesis there was the founders are two guys who come from the domain but actually understand data science. That's a small group of people to begin with. And they believe that phones are these amazing sensors that we can use to understand what people are working on and how much it costs. And if we understand that, then we don't have to build every road like it's the first time we've ever built one before, and we can, create a massive change in how much construction costs. And then another investment that we've said yes to is a company called Awake, which is still kind of in stealth, but the basic concept there is in security today. I think if you ask most people who are security practitioners, they'd say if we had all of the traffic, all of the data within our environments, and we had unlimited data science people and security incident response people, we would be pretty secure. Unfortunately, this is beyond even the most well-resourced organizations. And so what we're doing at Awake is using a bunch of modern machine learning techniques on these massive data sets and like modern data collection and storage techniques to do something that humans are not very good at, which is look at this massive amount of data and make sense and figure out what we actually need to pay attention to. And so those are two things that we've said yes to, and it's a combination of understanding the intuition for why the ML actually makes a value difference, and then believing that the people understand both the domain and are exceptional at the algorithmic part. Who wants to start? Eileen.
Sure. So we're investors in a company called Textio, Textio. Has anyone here used Textio? Oh, well, you all
Oh,
could. Textio is basically the evolution of writing, where when we write, other than spell check, there really has not been, and maybe Grammarly, technology has not been really applied to categories of writing, and yet there is so much basically feedback loop and learning loop data associated with what you write, who responds to it, how quickly they respond, and who responds. So the first application in Textio is job postings. Job specs are generally very poorly written. They're not uniformly or consistently written. And what words you use, how long it is, whether there's bullets, whether there's different, the tone of what you use will determine how many people respond to the job and what kind of people respond to the job and how long it takes you to close the hire. And so we basically have aggregated millions of specs, millions of applicant data, analyzed all the data, and we now have, Textio has created basically a recommendation engine that will basically read through what you've written and basically highlight how you could improve it to actually achieve better outcomes that are basically based on data and learning. It's really an incredible tool, and I think you'll see this company is basically building a platform that will apply more broadly to other types of writing in the near future.
We're investors in a YC company from last year called People.ai, really focused on how do you leverage all of the data that's being generated between salespeople and their customers and prospects. There's so much, a wealth of kind of exhaust data just coming out from all of those communications. And today you have the ability to collect, aggregate, process, and draw insights from that information. And so, again, how do you leverage that data to draw insights and assist with sales coaching, sales mentoring, pipeline reviews in a more automated way? And so, processes that typically a salesperson may work with their sales leader, sales manager to help them with that coaching. You can actually use intelligence to automate many of those processes.
We are early investors in a company that's also very early on called Matroid. And what they do is they analyze video and tell you what's going on in the video. And so as there's more cameras and people are capturing more video, it's very hard to figure out what's going on and cut to the places that are interesting. It has obviously applications in security, so you can get all of the security cameras and understand what's going on. But in addition, they can look at live streaming video from television channels and tell you how much FaceTime a certain politician is getting. And they can tell you how much airtime different cars, if they're your competitors, are getting on air. So it's really analyzing what's being put out there in video in different sources. So I think it's a pretty interesting application.
So our fund is a little less than a year old. The very first investment, though, that we made was a company actually out of Haifa, Israel, that was looking at colonoscopy videos for polyps in the videos, analyzing it to essentially tell the doctor whether there was a high chance that it might be cancerous and they should do a biopsy. And thematically, I'm a huge fan of things that use computer vision, because when I've looked at a whole bunch of companies in the space, the problem of actually figuring out what's in the image is fairly well solved. You just have to find the right team that's actually passionate about the space. So if someone really wants to spend the next 2 years doing a medical startup and analyzing colonoscopy videos, and they're going to go through the FDA and go through that process, we're happy to support that passion.
I'll give an example from one of each of 3 years, but I'll make them very brief. So one is Osaro, which is deep learning applied to robotics, since there's a lot of things that you want to do in terms of how you control robots. Number 2 is Unbabel, which is a machine translation system. Interesting thing about it is your customers are paying you to generate the data sets you then use to train your machine learning model, because if you're being paid to translate things, you actually have a big chunk of the data that you're being given. So I think that's a really interesting network effect where your customers are driving it. And number 3 is I recently seeded a stealth mode TPU, or tensor processing unit company, since I think there's really interesting, again, areas on the semiconductor side that are just emerging.
For inference or for training?
It's stealth.
Yeah, because I'm going to build ASICs on this side. Actually,
you probably will.
So let me. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so let me get some brief context from the audience. How many people here are an engineer, a math person, a data science person, statistics? Raise your hand. Okay, that's pretty solid. MIT people, all right. And how many people here work for a startup or a tech company that somehow uses machine learning? Also solid. So you're all also part of this conversation. So in the last 5 minutes, please go and use the app to ask us questions up here. Let's do something rapid fire. For the investors up here, describe an anti-pattern or something you wish entrepreneurs going after some sort of AI application would not do. What is a bad practice for starting a company?
Sitting in a room with a team you really like to try to come up with an idea.
I would say stretching the truth on what you've actually done and figured out. Like, I'd rather hear what you haven't figured out yet and what you're planning to do than hearing a team pretend that it's all done, and then when you get under the covers, it's really not done.
Way too long to get customers. You should get them ASAP.
Yeah, it's hard. A lot of people say they're an AI something company, and then I spend 20 minutes digging on the product and find out someday they'll add the AI piece. But it'd be great. I don't mind helping startups, but just flat out say what it does or doesn't do right away, and what you want to do in the future.
I think racing to try and be the platform for something before there's kind of an actual, before you've identified some real customer need and built a real solution around it. I've seen this in kind of every new kind of technology innovation, whether it was drones or something else. People race to be, they want to be the platform because that's where all the value is going to be created. But I much like to see people kind of identified a problem, they're addressing it, and oh, by the way, they've architected it in a way that there is a platform being built that can be applied to other problems as well. And just one more thought on that is, oftentimes with those platforms, it's kind of the target customers they end up trying to sell to. It's kind of too early in the market where the customers that can actually pay for it, they don't really know what to do with it, and then the customers that probably other early stage companies that actually could benefit from it, they don't really want to pay for it either because they'll just build what they want to build themselves.
So we ask three things at Greylock when we're looking at a company. Like, do we think this team is unique? Do we think this is a market we care about? And like, do we understand why they will win? Right? And I think, as Eileen said, in this area, it is perhaps green field in terms of the thinking of why AI-enabled companies will win. So I don't know if people have thoughts on differentiation in this space, algorithms being baked off, data network effects, some of the issues that companies are thinking about.
Honestly, I think the single biggest determinant of whether a company will succeed is if you're in a good market or not. And so I think it's really choosing a market where customers want to buy what you're doing. And so I've seen amazing teams just get completely destroyed by a terrible market. Ultimately, I think there are all sorts of network effects that you need to think about, but ultimately, you just need to see if anybody's going to buy what you're building, and I think that's the singular most important thing. But I differ from some other angels on that often.
I mean, I think it's kind of if you think about in everything, whether it's your hairdryer or your toaster or enterprise software, there's generally an upgrade cycle, upgrade consideration cycle, right? Which is like, I have a hairdryer, but there's a better hairdryer, right? And maybe I should spend $50 on this really special new hairdryer because it has all these features that my old hairdryer doesn't have. And enterprise software is the same way, right? Which is like, you're generally not going to consider new software if you just bought new software. But, once you've had your software for X years and people are starting to it's just kind of UX feels old or whatever, or it's too slow, or like there's going to be, if somebody comes by with something new that's better, faster, smarter, requires less clicks, has a better UX, it's better on mobile, like most companies will consider it if they have the resources. And I think AI or ML-driven software is the natural progression path for pretty much all enterprise software. So unlike the current Treasury Secretary, like I actually think that it's like a no-brainer, right? And so we as a community have an obligation to also think about what does that mean for the workforce and the economy and a bunch of other things, because this is going to happen for sure.
Yeah, a lot of times I like to see a team that has already been in a particular industry for some of these verticals where they say, oh, I've been working with the construction industry for 5 years. I've got all these companies. That's kind of what got me involved in this. And part of why I like picking some of the areas of deep learning that are really well developed, like the convolutional neural nets and image analysis, is I know they don't have to have any patented software. They can use the off-the-shelf stuff. They can find a team. It's still not trivial to build this stuff, but it's not where I'm worried, like, do they have the magic engineering team? It's more like, did they figure out where the pain point was for the customer? They have the in with the customer, and I know they can solve it from a technology side.
I guess just to build off of that, I think ultimately machine learning is a technology, it's not a market. And there were other ways of technology before this, and obviously this is a very impactful, very important way, but we shouldn't misinterpret what it actually is.
So one last question for me before we look for audience questions. There is a group of companies that say, we'll use humans plus AI to deliver some service. Examples that you may have heard of include, for example, Clara Labs or Scale.ai. Do you guys invest in companies like this, or how do you think about them?
I'm an investor in Clara Labs, so yes, I do invest in companies like that.
Or maybe another question is not categorically, but like, what do you think is challenging or interesting about these?
I think it's a reasonable place for a company to start, to begin by kind of proving out the actual product and that there's customer demand for it. But there needs to be a vision of how are you going to bring more automation to that. I don't know if that's a long-term sustainable plan to continue to have humans doing the work.
Leonard mentioned a company called Stitch Fix, which I think started out much more like we're going to buy a bunch of merchandise, we're going to have some rudimentary algorithms to predict what we should ship customers, but we're going to have a lot of personal stylists who are going to basically check what the algorithm's saying, make corrections, and approve the box. And over time, it's less and less stylist-driven and more algorithm-driven.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges, and I think actually John Lilly mentioned this, was that sometimes it's hard to wean yourself off of human beings depending on what the task is. And so human beings are actually amazingly good at lots of broad-scale sort of tasks, and your machine may only be good at something really narrow, and it's really hard oftentimes to wean yourself off the humans eventually. And that's one of the challenges why sometimes I just try to say, is this an AI-first type of company, which is, can you do this without humans? Because then I know you're all in. Whereas if you still have humans, I don't know when you'll wean yourself off.
So I'm going to get up so I can actually read the questions from the audience. So ask them. Okay. What are overhyped aspects of AI? Just got one here.
Chatbots, I think. You see chatbot company every day. I think there is a use for chatbots, obviously in the customer support organizations and a few other places. But also I feel like people trying to fit around a square peg into a round hole as well. So
I think people tend to overstate the amount of technology you need to do certain things. So sometimes just doing a regression is good enough, and you don't need to, screw around with something more complicated.
Okay, what else do we have? What are your concerns about using AI for early stage investing? Using AI for early stage investing. I'm going to interpret that as like actually using machine learning techniques to do early stage investing. And so I will add to this as well. We do not have like a brain at Greylock that makes our decisions for us, but like any modern company that believes in data and machine learning, like we do a bunch of analysis on public and private data sets to tell us what's happening with talent. So I don't know if there are ethical considerations around that, around pipeline and diversity bias, and I guess that's the thing we would worry about. But it sure seems useful so far.
Yeah, I've outsourced all my investing at this point to an R model that I trained at home, so I don't really invest anymore.
He's doing pretty well.
To one up you, I developed a deep learning mind that actually comes up with the ideas and then invests in them. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
There are a few funds, though, in the Valley that are focused specifically around kind of just data, using data to drive investment decisions. Yes. So Rocket Ship and Correlation and a few others, Signalfire as well.
That would be cool, actually. I think Netflix did an analysis of like the most successful movies and like basically a bunch of different fields. Like we should build something that basically just like you input all the unicorn companies and then outplops the perfect company.
The problem is you'll never know why it was that company that came out.
So black box. Okay, so I think we are out of time, but just so you guys know who we are again, can the seed and angel investors raise their hands?
We also do seed.
Oh,
we do seed too.
All right, I guess we would do seed too. I would consider Ajay and Vanessa and myself early stage venture capital investors, and Leonard, Aileen, and Elad as.
If you want a ton of money, go to them.
But great to chat with you guys. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.